Now we're at chapter 2, titled Normandy Invasion, and the subtitle, Private Beach Hits the Beach. As we finally reached a point about 150 yards from shore, one British sailor said, "Gentlemen, this is as close as we can take you," or words to that effect. And then they praised us for our valor. They indicated that they were going to bring more American soldiers in from their ship. The sea was turbulent, demanding every bit of courage from us soldiers on that little lifeboat to go over the side in chest-deep water. With everlasting gratitude to the U.S. Army combat engineers, we found a rope to grab hold of on the water's surface. Those magnificent engineers who had landed before us somehow had managed to drive large steel poles at 20-foot intervals deep into the floor of the English Channel, with rope on the surface secured to the poles in the spaces between. Even with that tremendous assist, however, I knew that if we lost our footing with the heavy loads we carried in that choppy water, we would have drowned. We successfully brought ourselves ashore loaded with rifle, extra ammo, grenades, knife, canteen, gas mask, full knapsack, plus the officer's baggage. No tips were ever received from the unknown officers. No baggage tips. That's war for you. We discovered later that because of the severe sea conditions for a small makeshift landing craft, no other men were brought ashore from the British ship the rest of that day. I mean, that sea was really turbulent, much more than on D-Day. This was D-Day plus 3, but it was still horrible. The viewing scene of the beach ahead from our boat, with what appeared to be bodies and wreckage along the water's edge, and seeing those surviving comrades moving forward or moving toward the upper levels of the coastline, we felt compelled to follow their example and move forward just as they had done. We had to show our courage to those still living who had forged ahead, and in honor of those who had perished. And we encouraged the men who would be following us as well. Nigel Cawthorne points out in his book, D-Day, Dawn of Heroes, that the German artillery defending Normandy, the Normandy coast, although manned by army personnel, was placed under the command of the German Navy if the firing was directed out to sea. But shelling of the beachhead was ordered by the ground forces. That's the way the German military set up their method of defense. But shelling of the beachhead was ordered by the ground forces, as I said, and the shoreline defined the extent to where each would direct their fire. The Luftwaffe, however, apparently had no restrictions as to where they did their strafing and bombing, be it land or sea. This rigid methodology was typical of the Germans' precise order of military operations. In their strict and often blind military discipline, This loyal mentality gave Hitler a strong grip on his field generals, who often wanted to alter his decisions when contrary to theirs. But they were trained to follow exact orders, sometimes beyond reason. The American soldier soon learned to depend on the rather consistent behavior of the Wehrmacht, and especially the highly trained SS troops. Our leaders in the field promoted ingenuity in our reacting to the expected pattern of certain enemy action. German shelling was intense that day that we landed on the beach, but small arms fire was almost non-existent. That first night, U.S. anti-aircraft barrages filled the sky with exploding flak to defend the American ground forces against German planes. Unfortunately, much of the debris showered down on us, killing some of our own, including an army chaplain. Adding to the distress of the past 48 hours, I developed a severe headache, like never before, nor ever close to duplicating. My foot continued to hurt, but my stomach behaved fairly well, in spite of several intrusive gulps of the English Channel hours earlier. I noticed an area where some supplies were stacked, and hoping it might be food, I stopped to ask. Yes, the personnel had food, and handed me a box of special crackers, a can of jam, and a can of small Vienna sausages. "For you and your men, sir." The comment was heartening, my being mistaken for an officer, and the mere offer of food a stimulant. But I could not let it pass, their thinking that I was an officer. So I reluctantly told them I wasn't, and yet I didn't let on that I was a mere buck private. An explanation of why I was addressed as an officer may well have been my knapsack harness. I had removed the pack and left it with the 4 men, but still wore the shoulder harness straps that were issued to officers and men operating out of tanks or armored cars. So apparently at that point I was already destined to be in the 9th Reconnaissance in an armored car or jeep, and that accounted for my type of knapsack as opposed to the standard infantry backpack. Replacement finding combat, a subheading. Vaguely aware at the time, I had been assigned to the 9th Reconnaissance Cavalry Troop of the 9th Infantry Division, but they had not yet located me, nor did I know where to find them. My classification was radio operator 776 with an alternate of rifleman 745. In due time, my assignment would be radio man turret gunner in an M8 armored car. Meanwhile, I fought for survival as an infantry rifleman in a replacement cadre until I hooked up with the 9th Recon. Another subheading, repercussions. The reality of what combat actually was like put us all in shock to various degrees. Our assault on the Normandy beach The first taste of this reality and its collective jolt to our psyches left each man on his own to cope with the near paralyzing effects of the almost certain doom confronting us. It would take time to adjust, if possible, while being compelled to move forward, not cognizant of time or place, other than the embroilment of hell surrounding us. There was a constant challenge to our mental stability. Do we remain sane, or do we fail in holding on to irrational awareness? The horror could be too much to take, and this was just the beginning. I have a slight recall as to my frame of mind during the month preceding the major offensive to defeat the German forces at Saint-Lô, France, or Saint-Lô as the French would say. However, my memory holds no specifics regarding our engagement here in mid-July, except for seeing the remaining diehards that we flushed out of the rubble of destroyed buildings, the German soldiers having survived after a number of days under siege. All suffered wounds, including broken eardrums. The American armies eventually breakthrough at Saint-Lô occurred on July 25th. This was a decisive win for the Allies, increasing their ability to advance eastward out of the bocage. That was the French word for the hedgerow country, into more open topography with fewer natural barriers for use, by the defending German troops or forces. There was one incident around that time that comes to mind when we came upon a large open field among the hedgerows dotted with dead dairy cows, most likely killed by earlier Allied artillery. The ghastly sight was only exceeded by the terrible smell of the bloated and decaying carcasses, almost twice the size of a familiar-looking cow. The gas buildup expanded their hides, which we were ordered to shoot into, staying our distance, of course, causing an immediate swoosh of revolting gas and other contents. We then shoveled dirt over the entire mess and hightailed it out of there. We could have made good use of our gas masks if only we had not tossed them away earlier. The general absence of remembering events during that period may have been related to the severe headache that I suffered after landing on the coast, when my head was planning to explode. My recovery slowly brought about a keen awareness that I could no longer deny our dreadful situation. I chose not to assent to thoughts of hopelessness and despair. In a sense, this made conditions more difficult, facing stark reality. But I was certain it was better than going berserk in the horrible turmoil of battle. You might think of this as God's offer of tough love. God's offer of tough love. The preceding episodes produced the turning point in my willingness to trust His plan for me. I became a better soldier from there on. Perhaps this would have made an appropriate case study for the Army's neuropsychiatric doctors. It was my good fortune being able to accept all the miseries and to survive. A number of my fellow combatants went the other direction. The mental trauma defeating them momentarily and for some permanently. I often pray for them. During that time, July 1944, a small element of disillusioned German army officers plotted to kill Adolf Hitler. At that very time, a bomb in a briefcase was placed under a table where the Fuhrer was expected to be seated during a high-level conference in Wolf's Lair. That was a location that they had this meeting. The explosion caused only minor injury to Hitler. He was partially protected by the large legs of the wood table. The assassin planners were soon executed. On April 30th, 1945, less than a year later, Hitler committed suicide in a Berlin bunker. About 2 weeks earlier, on April 12th, President Roosevelt passed away. In that same period, on April 28th, Mussolini was executed. This event may have influenced Hitler to end his own life 2 days after Mussolini was put to death. My unit was within 70 miles of Berlin at that time, and the Russian forces were overwhelming the German defenders in their attack on Berlin. Further reason for Hitler to self-destruct. Note, officers quite often did not wear their officer insignia in combat to avoid revealing themselves as a leader, a target of choice for the enemy, but sometimes misleading for the officer's own enlisted men.